The phone call that shattered my world came not from a stranger, but from a pawn shop owner who knew the true value of what my sister had stolen. While I lay unconscious on an operating table, fighting for my life, Vanessa was across town selling the very medals I'd earned with my blood and sacrifice in Afghanistan. And she had no idea that Mr. Garrison at Desert Rose Pawn had been a Marine himself. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. 3 weeks had passed since the surgery. 3 long weeks of lying in this sterile hospital bed in Riverside General, staring at ceiling tiles that had become as familiar as old friends. The doctor said I was lucky to be alive. A drunk driver had T-boned my Honda Civic at the intersection of Pine Street and 4th Avenue, sending me careening into a lamppost. Multiple internal injuries, broken ribs, a punctured lung, and a brain bleed that required immediate emergency surgery. Lucky to be alive. That's what everyone kept saying. But lying here now, with my left arm still in a sling and my body feeling like it had been put through a wood chipper, lucky wasn't the word I'd choose. The morning sun streamed through the partially open blinds, casting long shadows across the linoleum floor. I'd been discharged 2 days ago, and this was my first morning back in my small apartment on Maple Street, the same apartment I'd rented when I came back from my second tour in Afghanistan 4 years ago, the same apartment where I'd carefully displayed my service medals in a custom shadow box on the living room wall, right next to the American flag that had draped my buddy Connor's casket when we shipped him home. I shuffled slowly from the bedroom to the kitchen, every step sending sharp reminders through my healing ribs. The pain medication made everything feel distant and hazy, but I was grateful to be moving on my own again. Coffee first, then maybe I'd try to tackle some of the mail that had been piling up while I was unconscious and then bedridden. The living room felt different somehow. Emptier. I attributed it to being away for so long, to the way familiar spaces can feel foreign after an extended absence. But as I made my way to the couch with my steaming mug, something nagged at me. Something was wrong, but I couldn't quite place what. I settled onto the cushions carefully, wincing as my ribs protested the movement. The morning light hit the wall just right, illuminating the space where my breath caught in my throat. The shadow box was gone. I stared at the bare wall, the faded rectangle on the paint where my medals had hung for 4 years, the Bronze Star, the Purple Heart, the Afghanistan Campaign Medal, the Combat Infantryman Badge. All of them gone. Even the small American flag, the one that had meant more to me than anything else in this world. For a moment, I thought I was hallucinating. The pain medication could do that sometimes, create confusion, make you see things that weren't there, or in this case, not see things that should be. I blinked hard, shook my head, immediately regretting the movement, as pain shot down my neck. But the wall remained bare. My hands started to tremble, and it wasn't from the medication. I set the coffee mug down with shaking fingers, liquid sloshing over the rim and staining the table. My heart hammered against my damaged ribs, each beat a sharp reminder of my vulnerability. "No, no, no," I whispered to the empty room. "This isn't happening." I struggled to my feet, ignoring the protests from every injured part of my body, and moved closer to the wall. There were no signs of forced entry. No broken glass on the floor, no scratches on the wall. The shadow box hadn't been ripped down in some desperate burglary. It had been carefully removed, deliberately taken. My mind raced through possibilities. The paramedics? No! They would have been focused on getting me to the hospital, not stealing medals. The police? They might have secured the apartment, but they wouldn't take personal property. My landlord, Mrs. Patterson? She was 73 years old and could barely lift her groceries, let alone orchestrate a theft. That left only one possibility, and the thought made my stomach twist into knots. Family. I sank back onto the couch, the weight of realization settling over me like a heavy blanket. Only 3 people had keys to my apartment: me, Mrs. Patterson for emergencies, and Vanessa, my younger sister, the one person I'd trusted enough to give a spare key to when I deployed for my second tour in Afghanistan 4 years ago. The same sister who had visited me exactly once during my 3-week hospital stay, and only after our mother had practically dragged her there. The visit had been awkward, stilted, with Vanessa checking her phone more often than making eye contact with me. I thought back to that afternoon just 5 days ago. She'd seemed nervous, fidgety, kept glancing around the hospital room like she was looking for something. At the time, I'd attributed it to discomfort with hospitals, with seeing me bruised and bandaged and broken. Now a different picture began to form. She asked about my apartment. She said, "Are you worried about leaving it empty so long? I could check on it for you, make sure everything's okay." I'd been touched by the offer. Stupid, trusting me, had actually been grateful that she seemed to care about my well-being after years of barely speaking unless it was at family. "That would be great, Vanessa," I'd told her. "You still have the spare key, right?" She'd nodded quickly. Too quickly. "Yeah, of course. I'll make sure everything's secure." Secure. The word tasted bitter in my mouth now. I closed my eyes, trying to fight off the wave of nausea that had nothing to do with my injuries and everything to do with the growing certainty in my chest. Vanessa had taken them. My little sister had walked into my home while I lay unconscious in a hospital bed, fighting for my life, and stolen the most meaningful possessions I owned. But why? Why would she take them? What could she possibly want with military medals? The answer hit me with the force of another collision. Money. Vanessa was always short on money, always calling Mom and Dad with some new financial crisis. Last Christmas, she'd mentioned being behind on rent, owing money to her ex-boyfriend, needing help with her car payments. Our parents always bailed her out, just like they always had since we were kids. But this time, she hadn't asked them for help. This time, she'd decided to help herself. To my medals. To the physical representations of the worst and most meaningful moments of my military service. I thought about Connor Martinez, my battle buddy who didn't make it home. We'd enlisted together, gone through basic together, deployed together. He'd been standing 3 feet away from me when the IED went off outside Kandahar. 3 feet! The difference between him getting a flag-draped coffin and me getting a Purple Heart. The Bronze Star had come later, after I'd dragged 2 wounded soldiers to safety under enemy fire. I'd never felt like a hero, just a soldier doing her job, trying to get her people home alive. But the medal meant something. It represented sacrifice, courage, the bond between soldiers who'd seen hell together. And Vanessa had looked at those medals, at that flag, and seen dollar signs. My phone buzzed on the coffee table, startling me out of my spiraling thoughts. An unknown local number. Normally, I would have let it go to voicemail, but something made me answer. "Hello? Is this Natalie Brooks?" The voice was gravelly, older, with the unmistakable tone of someone who'd spent years giving orders. "Yes, this is Natalie." "Ma'am, this is James Garrison from Desert Rose Pawn Shop on Riverside Avenue. I need to speak with you about some items that were brought into my shop yesterday." My blood went cold. "What kind of items?" "Military medals, ma'am. A Bronze Star, Purple Heart, several others. The young lady who brought them in said they belonged to her deceased brother who served in Afghanistan." Deceased brother. The words hit me like a physical blow. Not only had Vanessa stolen from me, she'd told this man I was dead. While I lay in a hospital bed, she'd killed me off in her story to make the theft more believable, more sympathetic. "Sir," I managed, my voice barely above a whisper, "I'm not deceased. Those medals belong to me. and they were stolen from my apartment while I was in the hospital recovering from surgery. The silence on the other end stretched for what felt like an eternity. When Mr. Garrison spoke again, his voice was hard as granite. "Ma'am, I served 2 tours in Vietnam. I know the value of service medals, and not just the monetary kind. I had a feeling something wasn't right about that girl's story. Too nervous, too eager to get rid of them quick. I told her I needed time to research their value, but what I really did was call the police." Relief flooded through me, followed immediately by a fresh wave of betrayal. The police? This had become a criminal matter. My sister hadn't just hurt me, she'd committed a felony. "Can you come down to the shop this afternoon? The police want to speak with you. Verify ownership. Bring any documentation you have. Discharge papers, award citations, anything that proves these medals are yours." "I'll be there. And, Mr. Garrison, thank you. Thank you for knowing these medals were worth more than money." After I hung up, I sat in the silence of my apartment, staring at the empty space on the wall where my service record used to hang. The physical pain from my injuries seemed insignificant compared to this new wound, this betrayal that cut deeper than any drunk driver ever could. I thought about all the times I'd covered for Vanessa over the years, when she'd crashed Dad's car in high school and I'd claimed I'd been driving, when she'd needed money for college and I'd quietly helped without telling our parents, when she'd been arrested for a DUI 2 years ago and called me crying, begging me not to tell Mom and Dad. I'd always been the responsible one, the protective older sister. Even when I was thousands of miles away in a war zone, I'd sent money home to help with her expenses. When I'd been wounded and medevaced to Germany, the first person I asked the nurses to call wasn't our parents. It was Vanessa, because I wanted her to know I was okay, that she didn't need to worry. And this is how she repaid that loyalty? By stealing the most precious things I owned while I fought for my life? The apartment felt smaller, suffocating now. I needed air, needed space to think. Moving slowly, I grabbed my keys and headed for the door. The drive to Desert Rose Pawn Shop would give me time to process this betrayal, to decide how I wanted to handle it. Because one thing was becoming crystal clear as the shock wore off and the hurt settled into something harder, more determined. I wasn't going to let this slide. I wasn't going to make excuses for Vanessa this time, wasn't going to protect her from the consequences. As I pulled out of my parking space, wincing at the movement required to turn the steering wheel, I caught a glimpse of myself in the rearview mirror. The face looking back at me was pale, still bearing the fading bruises from the accident. But there was something new in my eyes, something that hadn't been there before the phone call. Determination. For too many years, I'd been the family peacekeeper, the one who smoothed over conflicts and made excuses for bad behavior. I'd been conditioned to put family loyalty above everything else, to forgive and forget for the sake of keeping everyone happy. But some betrayals couldn't be forgiven. Some lines, once crossed, changed everything. As I drove toward Desert Rose Pawn Shop, toward the confrontation with police and the official beginning of what would become a criminal case against my own sister, I felt something shifting inside me. The protective, forgiving older sister was dying, replaced by someone harder, someone who finally understood that loyalty had to go both ways. Vanessa had taught me that lesson the hard way. Now it was time for her to learn what happened when you betrayed someone who'd already survived hell. The road ahead blurred slightly as tears I'd been holding back finally started to fall. But they weren't tears of sadness anymore. They were tears of anger, of resolution, of a woman who'd finally reached her breaking point. My sister had made her choice. Now I was going to make mine. And this time, I wasn't going to be the one left broken. The drive to Desert Rose Pawn Shop felt like the longest 20 minutes of my life. Every red light gave me more time to think, more time for the betrayal to sink deeper into my bones. By the time I pulled into the parking lot of the small strip mall on Riverside Avenue,
My hands had stopped shaking. Something colder, more focused had taken over. The pawn shop sat between a laundromat and a tax preparation office, its windows filled with guitars, jewelry, and electronics. A neon sign flickered, "We buy gold," in faded yellow letters. It wasn't the kind of place I'd ever imagined seeing my service medals, but here we were. A bell chimed as I pushed through the glass door, and immediately I was hit with the musty smell of old items and forgotten dreams. Behind the counter stood a man in his early 70s, with steel gray hair cut in a military-precise buzz cut and sharp blue eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. This had to be Mr. Garrison. "You must be Natalie Brooks," he said, extending a weathered hand across the counter. His grip was firm, the handshake of a man who understood respect and honor. "James Garrison, Gunnery Sergeant, retired. First, let me say thank you for your service, and I'm damn sorry about what happened here." "Thank you, sir, and thank you for calling the police instead of just buying them." He gestured toward a small office behind the counter. "The detective is waiting in the back, but before we go in there, I want you to see something." Mr. Garrison reached under the counter and pulled out a familiar wooden shadow box. My breath caught as I saw my medals arranged inside, exactly as I displayed them in my apartment. The Bronze Star gleamed under the fluorescent lights, the Purple Heart's distinctive purple ribbon unmistakable. But seeing them here, in this place, felt wrong, violated. "Your sister brought these in yesterday around 2 p.m., Mr. Garrison said, his voice carefully controlled. "Claimed her brother had been killed in Afghanistan 3 years ago. Said the family needed money for funeral expenses they were still paying off. 3 years ago. Not only had Vanessa declared me dead, she'd rewritten history entirely. 3 years ago, I'd been very much alive, working as a logistics coordinator at Fort Braxton while dealing with my own PTSD and readjusting to civilian life. The story didn't sit right with me from the moment she walked in. She was nervous, kept checking her phone, wouldn't make eye contact when I asked her about her brother's service. Then she rushed me on the price, said she needed cash immediately." He opened the shadow box carefully, reverently, and pointed to the small brass nameplate at the bottom. "This is what really got my attention. Sergeant Natalie Brooks, United States Army." Now, I've bought military memorabilia before, and usually family members who inherit medals know at least basic details. But when I asked your sister about your service, about her brother's service, she couldn't tell me what unit you served with, where you were stationed, nothing. The detective emerged from the back office before I could respond. She was a woman in her 40s with short auburn hair and kind eyes that probably had seen too much. "Ms. Brooks? Detective Sarah Chen with Riverside PD. I'm glad you could come in so quickly." I followed her into the small office, Mr. Garrison close behind with my shadow box. The space was cramped, with filing cabinets lining the walls and a small desk covered in paperwork. Detective Chen gestured for me to sit in one of 2 folding chairs. "First, let me verify your identity," she said, pulling out a notepad. "Can you tell me your full name, date of birth, and social security number?" After I provided the information, she asked for my military ID and discharge papers. Fortunately, I'd thought to grab my important documents folder before leaving the apartment. Detective Chen examined everything carefully, cross-referencing with notes in her pad.
"Now, I need to ask you some detailed questions about the theft," Detective Chen continued. "When did you last see these medals in your apartment?" "The morning of my accident, 3 weeks ago. I remember specifically because the sunlight was hitting them just right as I had my coffee. It's part of my morning routine. I always look at them, think about the men and women who didn't make it home." "And who has access to your apartment?" "Just me, my landlord, Mrs. Patterson, for emergencies, and Vanessa. I gave her a spare key before my second deployment 4 years ago." Detective Chen made notes as I spoke. "Tell me about your sister's financial situation. Has she been having money problems recently?"
That opened a floodgate of memories I'd been trying to suppress. Vanessa has always been irresponsible with money. She's been behind on rent multiple times, has credit card debt, borrowed money from our parents regularly. Last Christmas, she mentioned owing money to her ex-boyfriend, something about a loan he'd given her. How much money are we talking about? I don't know exactly, but knowing Vanessa, probably several $1,000s. She has expensive tastes but works part-time at a clothing store. The math never added up. Mr. Garrison leaned forward. For what it's worth, I offered her $1,200 for the medals. She seemed disappointed, like she was expecting more, but she was ready to take it on the spot. No haggling, no questions about whether they might be worth more elsewhere. She just wanted cash fast. $1,200. That's what my service, my sacrifice, Connor's memory had been reduced to in my sister's mind. The Bronze Star alone should have been worth more than that to anyone who understood its significance. But to Vanessa, they were just objects to be converted to cash as quickly as possible. Detective Chen, I said, my voice steadier than I felt, what exactly is Vanessa being charged with? Several potential charges. Grand theft, since the medals are worth more than the felony threshold. Fraud, for the fake story about your death. And, depending on how this plays out, possibly identity theft, if she used your personal information in any other way. We're still investigating. Identity theft. The words sent a chill down my spine. What do you mean, other ways? We need to check if she's opened any accounts in your name, applied for credit cards, that sort of thing. Given that she had access to your apartment for weeks, she potentially had access to personal documents. I'd recommend pulling your credit report immediately. The scope of the potential betrayal was expanding by the minute. It wasn't just about the medals anymore. Vanessa might have used my military service, my social security number, my good credit to solve her financial problems. While I was unconscious, fighting for my life, she might have been systematically destroying my financial future. There's something else, Detective Chen said, consulting her notes. When we contacted your sister this morning to ask her to come in for questioning, she initially denied being at the pawn shop at all. Only when we mentioned we had surveillance footage did she admit to being there, but she changed her story. Now she claims you gave her the medals to sell, that you asked her to handle it while you were in the hospital. A bitter laugh escaped before I could stop it. That's ridiculous. Why would I ask her to sell medals that aren't even worth much money compared to their sentimental value? And why would I ask someone who's never shown any interest in my military service? That's what we figured, Detective Chen replied. Her story doesn't hold up to basic scrutiny, but it tells us she's willing to lie to police officers, which doesn't bode well for her credibility if this goes to trial. Trial, the word hung in the air like smoke. My sister might go to prison because she'd stolen from me while I was unconscious. The family dynamics that had always been complicated were about to become nuclear. Mr. Garrison cleared his throat. Detective, if I may, there's one more thing that bothered me about this whole situation. The young lady mentioned she needed money for medical bills related to her brother's death. But when I asked what kind of bills, funeral expenses, hospital costs, whatever, she got vague, said it was too painful to talk about specifics. Another red flag, Detective Chen agreed. People who are genuinely selling family heirlooms to pay legitimate debts usually have detailed knowledge of those debts. They'll tell you exactly what they owe and why. I thought back to my conversation with Vanessa at the hospital just 5 days ago. She'd asked about my apartment, offered to check on it, seemed nervous and distracted. At the time, I'd attributed her behavior to worry about my condition. Now I realized she'd already been planning the theft, probably working up the courage to go through with it. I need to ask this directly, Detective Chen said, her voice gentler now. Are you willing to press charges against your sister? I know this is family and these decisions are never easy. The question I'd been dreading. Press charges against Vanessa meant making this official, permanent. It meant family gatherings would never be the same, assuming there would be any family gatherings at all. It meant watching my little sister face felony charges, potential prison time, a permanent criminal record.
But it also meant standing up for myself for the first time in years. It meant saying that my service, my sacrifice, Connor's memory mattered more than family peace. Can I have some time to think about it? Of course, but I should tell you, we have enough evidence to charge her whether you cooperate or not. Mr. Garrison's testimony, the surveillance footage.
That was both a relief and a burden. The decision wasn't entirely mine to make, but my participation could determine how severe the consequences would be for Vanessa. After leaving the police station with my medals safely returned to me, I sat in my car for a long time, staring at the shadow box on the passenger seat. The late afternoon sun slanted through the windshield, illuminating the ribbons and metal that represented the most important years of my life. I thought about Connor Martinez, about how he died trying to save civilians caught in crossfire outside Kandahar. I thought about the Bronze Star citation that mentioned my actions under fire. Actions I'd taken not for glory, but because leaving fellow soldiers behind wasn't an option. I thought about the Purple Heart, earned when shrapnel tore through my left shoulder, and I kept fighting anyway because the mission mattered more than my pain. These medals weren't just decorations. They were proof that when everything went to hell, I'd stood my ground. They were reminders that I'd faced the worst humanity had to offer and chosen to protect people anyway. And Vanessa had looked at all of that, my service, my sacrifice, the memory of friends who didn't come home, and seen nothing but a quick solution to her money problems. The drive home was different from the drive rare. The same route, the same traffic lights, but I felt changed somehow. Clearer. The emotional fog that had clouded my judgment for years was finally lifting, replaced by something harder and more focused. Back in my apartment, I carefully rehung the shadow box in its place of honor on the living room wall. The medals caught the light just right, the way they always had, but now they meant something different. They weren't just reminders of my past service. They were symbols of my refusal to be victimized, to be taken advantage of, to let family loyalty excuse inexcusable behavior. I pulled out my laptop and spent the next 2 hours requesting credit reports from all 3 bureaus, checking bank statements, reviewing every financial account I had. Detective Chen was right to be concerned about identity theft. If Vanessa was willing to steal my medals and lie about my death, what else might she have done while I was unconscious? The credit reports painted a disturbing picture. 2 new credit card applications had been made in my name during the time I was in the hospital. Both had been approved based on my good credit score and military service record. The cards had been sent to a P.O. box I'd never opened, in a part of town I rarely visited. Vanessa hadn't just stolen my medals. She'd stolen my identity, my creditworthiness, my financial security. While I was fighting for my life, she'd been systematically destroying my financial future to solve her own problems. I documented everything, printing out statements and credit reports, organizing them into a folder that was growing thicker by the hour. This wasn't just about medals anymore. This was about a pattern of theft and deception that went far deeper than I'd initially realized. As the evening wore on, I found myself thinking about our childhood, trying to understand how we'd gotten here. Vanessa had always been the dramatic one, the one who needed more attention, more help, more forgiveness. Our parents had enabled her, making excuses for her behavior, bailing her out of every self-created crisis. But I'd been part of that system too. I'd covered for her, lied for her, given her money when she needed it. I'd been the responsible older sister who cleaned up her messes and asked no questions. In trying to protect her, I'd taught her that there were no real consequences for her actions. Not anymore. My phone rang just after 9 p.m. Mom's number. I stared at it for 4 rings before answering. Natalie? Honey, Vanessa called us crying. She says there's been some kind of misunderstanding with your medals. Something about police? I'm sure we can work this out as a family. And there it was, the same pattern that had played out for 28 years. Vanessa creates a crisis, runs to our parents, and everyone expects me to be understanding, to forgive, to let it slide for the sake of family harmony. It's not a misunderstanding, Mom. Vanessa stole my military medals while I was in surgery and tried to sell them at a pawn shop. She told the owner I was dead. Silence on the other end. Then, honey, I'm sure she didn't. She also opened credit cards in my name and ran up thousands of dollars in debt. This isn't some sibling disagreement. It's identity theft and fraud. But she's family, Natalie. Surely we can... I hung up. For the first time in my adult life, I'd hung up on my mother rather than listen to excuses for Vanessa's behavior. The silence that followed felt profound, like the moment after an explosion when your ears are ringing and the world has fundamentally changed. Tomorrow, I would call Detective Chen and tell her I wanted to press charges. I would cooperate fully with the prosecution. I would testify in court if necessary. Not because I wanted to hurt Vanessa, but because some lines once crossed change everything. I looked at my medals one more time before turning off the lights. In the darkness, they seemed to glow with their own light, reminders of who I'd been in the desert, who I could be again if I had the courage. Vanessa had made her choice when she walked into my apartment and chose theft over family loyalty.
I called Detective Chen at exactly 8 a.m. Detective, this is Natalie Brooks. I've made my decision. I want to press full charges against my sister. I'm glad to hear that, Natalie. Can you come in this morning? The district attorney wants to meet with you personally before we proceed with the arrest warrant. District attorney. Arrest warrant. The words should have felt heavier, but instead they brought a strange sense of relief. After years of cleaning up Vanessa's messes in private, this was finally going to be handled by people who didn't care about family dynamics or keeping the peace. The DA's office was located in the downtown courthouse, an imposing brick building that had seen decades of justice dispensed within its walls. District Attorney Rebecca Martinez was a woman in her 50s with silver-streaked hair and the no-nonsense demeanor of someone who'd prosecuted every kind of family crime imaginable. Miss Brooks, I want you to understand exactly what we're dealing with here, she said, spreading the evidence files across her desk. Your sister committed multiple felonies: grand theft for the medals, identity theft for the credit cards, fraud for lying to the pawn shop owner. We're looking at potential prison time of 3 to 7 years if convicted on all counts. 3 to 7 years. I tried to picture Vanessa in prison, tried to imagine visiting her behind glass partitions, and felt nothing but a cold emptiness where guilt should have been. I also want to make sure you understand what this process will mean for your family relationships, DA Martinez continued. In my experience, cases like this tear families apart permanently. Your parents, other relatives, they're going to pressure you to drop the charges. They're going to make you feel like you're destroying the family. They already started, I said quietly. My mother called last night asking me to work it out privately. That's going to get worse before it gets better. Are you prepared for that? I thought about Connor Martinez, about the flag that had covered his coffin, about every soldier who'd trusted me to have their back in Afghanistan. Ma'am, I've been through worse. She smiled grimly. I imagine you have. All right then, let's proceed. We'll execute the arrest warrant this afternoon. The call came at 3:47 p.m. when I was attempting to organize my mail pile, a mundane task that felt surreal given the circumstances. Dad's number flashed on my phone screen. Natalie Elizabeth Brooks, what the hell have you done? My father's voice was thunderous, angrier than I'd heard him since I was a teenager. But underneath the rage, I could hear something else. Panic. I pressed charges against Vanessa for stealing my military medals and committing identity theft. What she did was a felony, Dad. She's been arrested. They came to her apartment with handcuffs and everything. The neighbors saw the whole thing. Good. Let the neighbors see. Let everyone know that actions have consequences, even when you're family. She committed multiple crimes while I was unconscious in a hospital bed. What did you expect me to do? Handle it as a family. Work it out. Not destroy your sister's life over some pieces of metal.
Pieces of metal? The words hit like a slap across the face. To my father, a man who'd never served, who'd never put his life on the line for anything greater than himself, my Bronze Star and Purple Heart were just pieces of metal. "I think this conversation is over," I said. "Don't you dare hang up on me! Your mother is beside herself. Vanessa is facing prison time. And for what? Because you can't forgive your little sister for making a mistake? A mistake is forgetting to water your plants. This was calculated theft and fraud. She needed money. Her rent was overdue. She owed money to dangerous people. What was she supposed to do? Get a second job, ask for help, apply for assistance programs, literally anything other than steal from her sister who was fighting for her life." But even as I said it, I realized the truth. Vanessa knew exactly what she was doing when she chose theft over asking for help. Asking for help would have meant admitting she'd screwed up again, would have meant facing disappointment and lectures. Stealing from me was easier because she calculated, correctly until now, that I would never fight back. "You're going to destroy this family," Dad said, his voice breaking slightly. "No, Dad. Vanessa destroyed it when she decided my life was worth less than her convenience. I'm just refusing to pretend otherwise anymore." The silence stretched for nearly 30 seconds before he hung up on me. An hour later, Mom arrived at my door unannounced. I watched through the peephole as she stood in the hallway, clutching her purse with white knuckles, practicing what she was going to say. When I finally opened the door, her eyes were red-rimmed and desperate. "Natalie, honey, please, we need to talk." I stepped aside to let her in, but I didn't offer coffee or invite her to sit. This wasn't a social visit. "I just came from the jail," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Do you know what it's like to see your baby girl in an orange jumpsuit? Do you know what it's like to wake up from life-saving surgery and discover your baby sister stole the most meaningful possessions you own?" Mom flinched as if I'd struck her. "She made a mistake, sweetie. A terrible mistake, but—"
She didn't make a mistake. She made a series of calculated decisions over several weeks. She decided to enter my apartment without permission. She decided to take my medals. She decided to research pawn shops. She decided to create a fake story about my death. She decided to open credit cards in my name. None of that was a mistake. "But she's your sister." The words hung in the air like a challenge. For 30 years, "but she's your sister," had been the magic phrase that made me swallow my anger, excuse bad behavior, give Vanessa yet another chance. Not anymore. Being my sister should have made this unthinkable, not forgivable. Mom sat down heavily on my couch, suddenly looking older than her 63 years. "The lawyer says she could get 7 years. 7 years, Natalie. She'll be 35 when she gets out. Her life will be over." Her life isn't over, but her life of using family as a safety net for criminal behavior is over. "How can you be so cold? This isn't the daughter I raised." That stung, because in some ways she was right. The daughter she'd raised would have already bailed Vanessa out, would have found a way to make this disappear, would have sacrificed her own well-being to keep the family peace. "You raised me to be responsible for everyone else's happiness, to clean up messes I didn't make, to forgive anything in the name of family loyalty. But you forgot to teach me that loyalty goes both ways." She was desperate, Natalie. Desperate people do desperate things. I was desperate too, Mom. Desperate to survive my injuries, desperate to recover, desperate to rebuild my life. But instead of supporting me through that, my sister saw opportunity. Mom's shoulders shook as she started crying in earnest. "Please, baby, drop the charges. We'll make this right. Vanessa will pay you back for everything. We'll make sure of it."
Pay me back. As if the Bronze Star could be replaced with a trip to the military surplus store. As if Connor's memory could be purchased with a check. With what money, Mom? Vanessa doesn't have money. You and Dad don't have money. She'll promise to pay me back, just like she's promised to pay back everyone else she owes. And then in 6 months, there will be another crisis, and everyone will expect me to understand. So you'd rather send her to prison? The question was designed to make me feel guilty, to make me the villain in this story. But I'd spent too many sleepless nights thinking about this to be manipulated now. I'd rather she face the consequences of her choices. Maybe prison will teach her something that 30 years of family enabling hasn't. Mom stood up abruptly, her sadness transforming into anger. Fine. If that's how you want it, but don't expect us to forgive you for this. Don't expect to be part of this family anymore. The threat was supposed to bring me to my knees, supposed to make me choose between justice and belonging. A year ago, it might have worked, but something had changed during those weeks in the hospital, during the moment I discovered my medals were gone, during the conversation with Detective Chen. If being part of this family means accepting theft and fraud as acceptable behavior, then I don't want to be part of it. Mom stared at me for a long moment, as if seeing me for the first time. I don't know who you've become, but you're not my daughter anymore. After she left, I sat in the quiet of my apartment and felt the weight of what had just happened. In the span of one afternoon, I'd been disowned by both parents, cast out of the family I'd spent 3 decades trying to please and protect. It should have hurt more than it did. 2 days later, Vanessa made bail. I knew because she showed up at my door at 11 p.m., pounding on it hard enough to wake the neighbors. When I looked through the peephole, she looked terrible, hollow-eyed, disheveled, desperate in a way I'd never seen before. I opened the door but kept the chain lock engaged. "Natalie, please, I need to talk to you." "There's nothing to talk about, Vanessa." "Yes, there is. I need you to drop the charges." Her voice was different. Not the entitled whining I'd grown accustomed to, but something raw, more honest. It was the first time she'd ever asked me for anything without demanding it as her right. "I can't do that." "Please, I'll pay you back for everything. I'll get help, go to counseling, whatever you want. Just don't let them send me to prison." Through the crack in the door, I could see tears streaming down her face. Real tears, not the manipulative crying she'd used since childhood to get her way. "Where would you get the money to pay me back?" "I don't know, but I'll figure it out. I'll get a second job. You'll what? Do all the things you should have done instead of stealing from me in the first place?" She was quiet for a moment, probably realizing how her promises sounded in light of her actions. "I know I screwed up," she said finally. "I know it was wrong, but I was scared, Nat, really scared. These guys I owe money to, they're not the kind of people who accept payment plans." For just a moment, I felt a flicker of the old protectiveness, the instinct to solve her problems and shield her from consequences. But then I remembered waking up in that hospital bed, remembered the empty wall where my medals should have been, remembered learning she'd told strangers I was dead.
"But I'm your sister." There it was again, the magic phrase that was supposed to erase everything, supposed to make me the bad guy for refusing to enable her. Being my sister should have made this impossible, not excusable. I started to close the door, but she pressed her face closer to the crack. "Nat, please, I'm sorry. I'm really, truly sorry." And for the first time in this entire nightmare, she sounded like she meant it. But sorry wasn't enough anymore. Sorry didn't undo the betrayal, didn't restore my trust, didn't repair the damage to my credit or my sense of security. "I believe you're sorry, Vanessa, but you're sorry you got caught, not sorry you did it." "That's not true."
If the pawn shop owner hadn't been suspicious, if he just bought the metals like you planned, would you ever have told me what you did? Her silence was answer enough. That's what I thought. Good night, Vanessa. I closed the door and turned the deadbolt, listening as she stood in the hallway for several minutes before finally walking away. Through the thin wall, I could hear her crying in the stairwell, and for the first time since this began, I felt the sharp sting of regret. But regret wasn't the same as doubt. I'd made the right choice, the hard choice, the choice that 20-year-old me would never have been strong enough to make. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for the following Tuesday. Over the weekend, the pressure campaign intensified. Cousins called to tell me I was tearing the family apart. Family friends reached out to suggest mediation instead of prosecution. Even my elderly aunt, who'd never spoken to me about anything more serious than holiday dinner plans, left a voicemail begging me to reconsider. But the call that nearly broke my resolve came from Vanessa's ex-boyfriend, Marcus. "Look, I know we don't know each other well," he said, "but I care about Vanessa and I know she cares about you. This is killing her, Natalie. She's not eating, barely sleeping. I'm worried she might hurt herself." The implication was clear. If Vanessa harmed herself, it would be my fault for not dropping the charges. It was emotional blackmail of the highest order, and it was devastatingly effective. For the first time since making my decision, I seriously considered backing down. The thought of Vanessa hurting herself, of having that on my conscience, was almost unbearable. But then I remembered something my therapist had told me during PTSD counseling after my discharge. You're not responsible for other people's choices, only your own response to them. I called Marcus back. If you're genuinely concerned about Vanessa's mental health, help her get professional counseling. But don't try to manipulate me into dropping charges by implying she might hurt herself. That's not fair to either of us. She's family, Natalie. So am I. And when I was the one who might not survive, she was stealing from me. Where was the family loyalty then? On Monday night, unable to sleep, I drove to the local veterans cemetery. It was after midnight, the gates technically closed, but I knew a spot in the fence where I could slip through. I'd been here before, many times, when civilian life felt too overwhelming and I needed to remember why I'd served. I found Connor's grave in Section 12, Row 7. The headstone was simple, white marble, engraved with his name, rank, dates of service, and the bronze star emblem. I sat cross-legged in the grass beside it, ignoring the dampness seeping through my jeans. I don't know if I'm doing the right thing, Con, I said to the quiet darkness. Everyone says family should forgive family, that I should let this go. But she stole our medals, man. She told people we were dead to make a quick buck. The cemetery was silent except for the distant hum of traffic on the interstate. But in that silence, I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks. Peace. Not the fragile, conditional peace that came from avoiding conflict, but the deep, unshakable peace that came from knowing you'd stood up for what mattered. She chose money over memory, I continued, over respect, over everything we fought for over there. And everyone wants me to just forgive her because we shared DNA? I stayed there for over an hour, talking to Connor, talking to myself, talking to the universe about justice and family and the price of loyalty. When I finally drove home, I was certain of one thing. Tomorrow, I would walk into that courtroom with my head held high. Some battles were worth fighting, even when you fought them alone. Especially when you fought them alone. The courtroom was smaller than I had expected, with worn wooden benches and fluorescent lights that hummed slightly overhead. I sat in the front row behind the prosecutor's table wearing my dress blues for the first time since my discharge ceremony 4 years ago. The uniform still fit, though it felt different now. Not like a costume or a memory, but like armor. Vanessa sat at the defense table 20 feet away wearing a conservative navy dress our mother had probably bought for the occasion. She looked thinner than when she'd shown up at my door, her face pale and drawn. When she glanced back at me, I saw something in her eyes I'd never seen before. Genuine fear. The plea hearing lasted only 15 minutes. DA Martinez had negotiated a deal. Vanessa would plead guilty to grand theft and fraud, serve 18 months in minimum security prison, and pay full restitution for the credit card debt and legal fees. In exchange, The identity theft charges would be dropped, saving her from the possibility of 7 years behind bars. "Ms. Brooks," asked Judge Harrison, looking at my sister, "do you understand that by accepting this plea, you are admitting guilt to these charges?" "Yes, Your Honor."
"And do you understand that this will result in a permanent felony record that will affect your ability to find employment, housing, and credit in the future?" Vanessa's voice cracked slightly. "Yes, Your Honor." When it was over, when the gavel fell and the sentence was official, I felt nothing like victory. There was no surge of satisfaction, no sense of vindication, just a quiet, settled feeling, like a long-held breath finally being released. Outside the courthouse, our parents waited with Vanessa's court-appointed attorney. Mom's eyes were red and puffy, Dad's face was stone. Neither of them looked at me as I walked past, but I heard Mom whisper to the lawyer, 18 months. My baby girl, 18 months. I wanted to remind her that 18 months was considerably less than the lifetime Vanessa had tried to steal from me, but I kept walking. Some battles were over not because you'd won them, but because they were no longer worth fighting. The first few months after the sentencing were the strangest of my adult life. The silence was profound. No crisis calls from Vanessa, no guilt trips from our parents, no family obligations that felt like hostage negotiations. For the first time in decades, my phone rang only when someone actually wanted to talk to me, not because they needed something from me. I threw myself into physical therapy with a determination that surprised even my therapist. The car accident had left me with lingering weakness in my left shoulder, the same shoulder that had been injured by shrapnel in Afghanistan. But instead of seeing it as another limitation, I began to view it as a challenge to overcome. "You're pushing pretty hard today," Dr. Reeves observed during a session in late spring. "Any particular reason?" "I spent too many years making excuses for other people's weakness," I said, straining against the resistance band. "I'm done making excuses for my own." The physical progress was matched by something less tangible, but equally important. I started sleeping through the night again, something I hadn't done consistently since my discharge. The hypervigilance that had defined my post-military years began to fade, replaced by a calmer awareness of my surroundings. I enrolled in a woodworking class at the community college, drawn by the idea of creating something beautiful and permanent with my hands. The instructor, a retired carpenter named Frank, was initially skeptical about my damaged shoulder, but I proved him wrong week after week. By summer, I was crafting furniture that was not only functional, but elegant. "You've got natural talent," Frank told me as I put the finishing touches on a cherrywood bookshelf. "Ever think about making this more than a hobby?" The question planted a seed that grew over the following weeks. I'd been working the same logistics job for 3 years, going through the motions but feeling no passion for it. The woodworking, though, felt different. It felt like building something that mattered. I started taking on small commissioned pieces, a coffee table for a neighbor, a set of shelves for a coworker. Word spread, and by fall, I had more requests than I could handle while maintaining my full-time job. The decision to go freelance felt terrifying and liberating in equal measure. Natalie's Custom Woodworking opened officially in January, operating out of a rented workspace space in an old industrial building downtown. The first few months were lean, but I'd learned to live on less during my military years, and I had no family emergencies draining my resources for the first time in memory. The work filled something in me that I hadn't realized was empty. Each piece was a problem to solve, a challenge to overcome, a tangible result of effort and skill. When customers picked up their finished furniture, their faces lit up in a way that reminded me why I'd enjoyed military service. The satisfaction of completing a mission, of doing something that mattered to someone else. One afternoon in March, as I was sanding a dining table in my workshop, my phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, but the area code was local. "Is this Natalie Brooks?" "Yes." "This is Officer Jeanette Reyes with the Riverside County Parole Office. I'm calling about your sister, Vanessa Brooks. She's being released next week, and she's requested to include you in her reentry plan." 13 months. Vanessa had served 13 of her 18-month sentence, earning early release for good behavior.
I hadn't thought about her release date consciously, but some part of me had been counting the days. What does that mean exactly? I asked. She's listed you as someone who might provide emotional support during her transition back to civilian life. It's not required, but it can be helpful for successful reintegration. Emotional support. The words felt foreign coming from someone talking about Vanessa. For 30 years, the emotional support had flowed in only one direction, from me to her. I need to think about it. Of course. She has your contact information if she wants to reach out directly. That call came 2 days later. Vanessa's voice sounded different over the phone. Quieter, more uncertain than I remembered. Hi, Nat. I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I wanted you to know I'm getting out on Friday. I heard. I was wondering if maybe we could talk? Just talk? I know I don't have the right to ask for anything else. The old me would have said yes immediately, would have been relieved that she was finally ready to apologize properly. But the woman I'd become over the past year was more cautious. What do you want to talk about, Vanessa? Everything. What I did, why I did it, how sorry I am, how much I've learned. She paused. I know you probably won't believe this, but prison changed me, really changed me. Maybe it had. People could change. I was living proof of that. But change had to be demonstrated over time, not declared in a phone call. I'm willing to meet for coffee. Once. Public place. But I'm not promising anything beyond that.
Thank you. That's more than I deserve. We met the following Saturday at a cafe downtown, not far from my workshop. I arrived early, choosing a table near the window where I could watch the street. Old habits from deployment, but they made me feel more secure. Vanessa looked different. Thinner, yes, but also somehow older. Her hair was shorter, styled simply, and she wore no makeup. The designer clothes and expensive accessories were gone, replaced by plain jeans and a simple sweater. But the biggest change was in her eyes. They looked directly at me instead of darting around the room, and there was a weight in them that hadn't been there before. "You look good," she said, sitting down across from me. "Healthy." "Prison agrees with you." Then I immediately regretted the sarcasm. This was supposed to be a fresh start, not an opportunity to relitigate the past. But Vanessa just nodded. In some ways, it really did. Structure, routine, no distractions. I had a lot of time to think about who I was and who I wanted to become. And what did you decide? That I'd spent 30 years being a selfish, entitled person who used family love as a weapon. That I'd hurt the people who cared about me most because I knew they'd take it. That I'd stolen from my sister while she was fighting for her life because it was easier than facing my own failures. The words were right, but I'd heard Vanessa say the right words before. What mattered was whether she meant them this time. Why now? Why are you really sorry now when you weren't sorry before you got caught? She was quiet for a long moment, staring into her coffee cup. There was this woman in my unit, housing unit, Maria. She was in for writing bad checks to feed her kids after her husband left. She talked about her sister constantly, how her sister had raised those kids while Maria was inside, how her sister never visited because Maria had stolen from her too. Vanessa looked up at me. Maria died of a heart attack 6 months into her sentence. 34 years old, died alone because she'd burned every bridge with people who'd loved her. At her memorial service, her sister came, and she cried like her heart was broken. Not just because Maria was dead, but because they'd never had the chance to fix things. I could see where this was going, but I let her continue. I realized I could end up like Maria. I could die having never made things right with the person who'd always been there for me. And it wouldn't be because you were unforgiving, it would be because I'd never truly tried to earn forgiveness. So this is about you not wanting to die with regrets? No. Her response was immediate, firm.
This is about me finally understanding that what I did to you was unforgivable and accepting that you have every right to never speak to me again. I'm not here to ask for forgiveness, Nat. I'm here to give you the apology you deserved a year ago. That was different. Every previous apology from Vanessa had come with conditions, with expectations, with an assumption that saying sorry would reset everything back to normal. This one felt different. I'm listening. I stole your medals because I was desperate and selfish, and I knew you wouldn't fight back. I violated your trust, your home, your service, and the memory of your friends who died. I tried to reduce your sacrifice to a dollar amount because it was convenient for me to lie about your death, because making you a tragic figure was easier than admitting I was a thief. She took a shaky breath before continuing. I opened credit cards in your name because I'd already crossed the line and figured I might as well solve all my problems at once. I let Mom and Dad pressure you to drop the charges because I was too cowardly to face the consequences of my choices. And when you refused to enable me anymore, I let everyone make you the villain because it was easier than admitting I was the one who destroyed our family.
I'm not ready to have you in my life again, I said carefully. The trust is broken, and trust takes time to rebuild. I know, but I'm not saying never. I'm saying not yet. Her eyes filled with tears, not the manipulative crying I remembered, but quiet, grateful tears. That's more hope than I expected. More than I deserve. Maybe in a year, if you've stayed clean, stayed employed, stayed out of trouble, we can have another conversation. But I won't be checking up on you or helping you or giving you chances to prove yourself. You'll have to do that on your own. I understand. We parted ways outside the cafe with a handshake. Formal, distant, but not hostile. As I watched her walk away, I realized this was what growth looked like. Not the dramatic reconciliation our parents would have preferred, but a small, careful step toward the possibility of healing. 6 months later, I received a graduation announcement in the mail. Vanessa had completed a certified addiction counseling program while in prison and was now working at a residential treatment facility across the state. The card included no note, no request for acknowledgement, just information, shared quietly. I kept the announcement on my kitchen counter for a week before filing it away. Progress, I told myself. Not forgiveness yet, but progress. My business had grown steadily throughout the year. The workshop that had once felt too big now felt too small, and I was looking at larger spaces downtown. I'd hired an apprentice, a young veteran named David, who reminded me of myself at that age. Talented, driven, and carrying invisible wounds that work helped heal. You ever think about expanding into commercial contracts? David asked one afternoon as we assembled a bedroom set for a customer. Maybe someday. Why? My buddy's opening a restaurant downtown, says he needs custom tables and chairs, wants to support veteran-owned businesses. The idea intrigued me. Commercial work would mean bigger projects, steady income, the chance to build something lasting in the community. Set up a meeting. Let's see what he has in mind. That evening, I stood in my apartment looking at the shadow box on the wall. The metals gleamed in the lamplight, exactly as they always had, but they looked different now, not just as reminders of the past, but as foundations for the future. I thought about Connor Martinez, about how he always said the real honor wasn't in the medals, but in what you did after you earned them. For too many years, I treated my service as something that was behind me, a chapter that was closed. Now I understood it differently. Service wasn't something that ended with discharge. It was something you carried forward, something that shaped how you treated others, how you faced challenges, how you decided what was worth fighting for. I'd fought for my country overseas. I'd fought for my dignity and self-respect in court. Now I was fighting for my future, building something meaningful with my hands and my skills.
And for the first time in years, I was winning. My phone buzzed with a text from David. Restaurant guy wants to meet Monday, says he's heard great things about your work. I smiled and typed back, "Tell him we'll be there." Outside, the city hummed with weekend energy. Somewhere across town, my parents were probably having dinner, still convinced I was the villain in their family story. Somewhere else, Vanessa was probably working late at the treatment center, trying to earn redemption one day at a time. But here, in my small apartment above a bustling street, surrounded by the furniture I'd built and the life I'd reconstructed, I was exactly where I belonged. The medals on my wall weren't just decorations anymore. They were reminders of what I was capable of when I refused to surrender. I'd learned the hard way that family loyalty without respect was just enablement wearing a prettier name. I'd learned that forgiveness without accountability was just permission to be hurt again. I'd learned that sometimes walking away from people you loved was the most loving thing you could do. Most importantly, I'd learned that the strongest person in any room wasn't the one who never got knocked down, but the one who got back up and refused to accept anything less than what they deserved. Tomorrow was Monday. There were tables to build, a business to grow, a future to construct piece by careful piece. And for the first time in my adult life, I was building it entirely for myself. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.